Hello everyone, greetings from PayTabs technical support team. In this series, you will learn how to integrate with PayTabs through our PT2 API endpoints. And we will walk you through the fourth integration type, which is the own form. For the purpose of this series, we have created a very simple Laravel project to walk you through the integration process. But feel free to follow the steps in this series with your own project, whatever the programming language or the frameworks used to integrate with PayTabs. So, let's get started. In this video, we are going to learn more about how we can handle the payment response inside our own form integration type. So, let's get started. The first thing you should know is that you can find the full documentation for this part inside PayTabs support portal under the article called the Own Form APIs Integration Manual. If we navigated inside the integration manual to step 5, we will find that step 5 is dedicated to handle the payment response. Now here we are talking about the direct payment response, meaning the response that you receive directly after the customer finished the payment. There is another payment response which is the post payment response, and this is a server to server response which we highly recommend you to rely on, as it will be initiated to your server from PayTab server completely after the payment is done, containing all the details. So for now, we are learning about the payment response, but we highly recommend you to rely on the post payment response if you want to update your database or update your system with real details, as it will be sent from PayTab server to your servers. So now back to step 5, which is handling the payment response. And actually, it's have a bit different here in the payment response, as we have two types of responses according to the card use. We clarified previously in the series that the customer may use a 3DS supported card or not 3DS supported card, and this will affect how the payment should look. So if you remember, when we used to use a normal non-3DS supported card, we used to fulfill the payment directly like that. So once the customer fill out his card details like that, and he finished this out, we can see that directly the payment will be done. We will receive the transaction response directly. Nothing extra is needed. However, when the customer used the 3DS enroll card like this one, and let's try it out again so we can see the simulation of it, like that. Come on. Okay. This one. This time, your customer need to be redirected, if you remember, to an OTP page where he fulfilled the OTP sent from his bank, and once he is authenticated, he will be redirected back to your website. So this is the different flow that you may face in the own form integration time. Now, in the first time when we used a non-3DS secure card, you were the one responsible for redirecting your customer, so actually there is no way of handling the payment response from PayTab's side. You simply initiate a payment, you receive a request, then redirect your customer into the return page that you want. But in the next case, where we used to redirect the customer to an external page for fulfilling his OTP, then returning the customer back to your website, this is the process that we want to clarify. How the customers will be redirected back to your website or your store after they have finished the OTP level. This is done using one of our parameter called the return URL. Now, the return URL is a very simple parameter that you can use inside your request payload, and once the payment is done from the OTP level, the customer will be redirected to this return URL, and along with it, you will receive a transaction request that contains simple transaction details. Of course, not all the transaction details, that contain some of the transaction details clarified over here. The return URL response, you will find all of these transaction responses details. Now, over here, what I'm going to do inside my data wrapper to generate the request, I'm going to use the return URL like this one. So it's a parameter, It contains a return URL, but make sure of something very important. This return URL, in order to receive the transaction request, the details request within it, it must be secured. So it must be an HTTPS URL. So make sure to use an HTTPS URL. And once you used one like this one, and now the next thing you will need to make a route inside your project that handle the request sent to it. So PayTabs will send a request inside this URL and will redirect your customer to this URL. So simply, if you get back to my controller over here, you can see that inside my initiation function, what I am making is very simple. I am checking for the return response from my request. Now, if this return response contain a payment result, it means that the payment is done already. The customer did not use the 3DS card. So the payment, if the payment is done, I'm checking if it's have a response status of A. And as you can see over here, the response status contain or clarify the status of the response with it accepted or not. And I'm checking for the response status if it's A, so I'm going to return a very simple view, success view, and I'm going to attach the response to it to view it. Now, if it's not an A, so I'm going to return another view, which is the error. And in this case, I'm going to view also the response along in the error page. Now, the other flow for the 3DS secured card that I am receiving a redirect URL inside my response. So this time I'm going to redirect my customer to this redirect URL, and once the customer finished the OTP as we seen in the previous example, he will be returned to the return URL that I have clarified over here. So now what you need to do, as we said, is to create this route inside your store, make sure it's secured, make sure you handle the request sent along with PayTabs. So over here we can see if we navigated to one of our return. Let's get back to step 5 over here. If we navigated to, for example, request response return, the request return, okay, or the return URL, we will see that the return URL will contain the response that looks like this one, if it's contained an HTTPS URL. So now the next thing you need to do is to use this response to whatever you want to view, a certain view for your customers, anything. But will be the transaction or the request sent to your return URL. It will look something like this. And now what you need to do is simply provide this return URL inside your request, and your customer will be redirected back to it. So now, as you can see, we can initiate another payment again to see how it works. Going to initiate the payment like that. Going to fulfill my 3DS secure card. This is the CV, I believe. Now, as you can see, I have redirected my customer to the redirect URL. This is the redirect URL I received. I will authenticate this OTP level. Then, as you can see, the customer has been returned back to my website, to my store. This is the return URL I have provided over here, as you can see. This is one. And along with it, I have received this request. This request contains the details of this transaction, the general details of this transaction, but for the all details, we are going to receive it inside the callback clarified in the next video. Now, the final thing we want to talk about or discuss is a step that you can use, which is verifying this response. So actually, sometimes you may receive a response from another source rather than PayTabs. So how you can make sure that this response is your response and it's coming from PayTabs, not from someone else, to avoid any way of security attacks. So here we have provided you with a solution article called How to Verify the Response Received from PayTabs or Signature Verification. Simply what happens is PayTabs, along with the returned response sent to you over here, will send you a signature like this one. Now you can use this signature to verify whether this response is the correct response coming from you from PayTabs side or not. How this verification works, simply you can see that the verification is done post for callbacks and return. We are going to navigate to the return sample over here, and this is done by following these steps. So now what you need for this process, you need to have your API key. For example, it will look something like that, your API server key, and now you have this request coming from PayTabs. You want to make sure that the request that you received inside the return URL is coming from PayTabs and it's your request. So the first thing you need to do is, if you remember this signature parameter that we received, you are going to remove it from this request, okay? And you are going to remove any empty parameters. For example, these two are empty, so I'm going to also remove it from the response over here. Okay, I'm going to sort this response. Okay, so it looks like this, and I'm going to do a URL encoding. So this URL encoding, okay, something like the key and value encoding, it will have a result that looks like this. Okay, and once you do this URL encoding, the next thing you should do is hash this value using the SHA-256 scheme. Once you hash this value, okay, of course you are using the SHA-256 scheme, and you will be doing the hash with your server key. Once the hash is done, you will receive this value over here. Now, you should compare this value to the signature that you have removed from earlier over here, this one signature that you have received, and the two signature must be the same. If they are both the same, this means that this response is coming from PayTabs and it's the correct response that you should add or edit any of your business along with it. So we have a sample code for it over here, a sample PHP code. Of course, you can implement it in whatever the language you're using, and we have implemented this sample code over here. If we get back to the return URL we created, we have the return URL inside my controller over here. Okay, as you can see, I have passed this return URL, going to uncomment it to show it to you. I have passed this return URL to the payment responsibility to show the verify return over here. Let's walk to it inside our payment repository. So this is simply what we are doing. I'm checking if it's not empty, and if we have a signature, I'm going to save my server key from my environment file. Then I'm going to remove the signature. As you can see, I have removed the signature from here. And after removing the signature from the request, now I'm going to do the sorting. Okay, then I'm going to do the URL encoding, and finally I'm going to check if it's genuine using the hashing mechanism we talked, which is the SHA-256 and our server key, and of course the request. And finally I'm going to check if these two hashes are equals or not. If they are equal, I'm going to return true. If it's not, I'm going to return false and reject this request from updating anything inside my system. So this is simply how the return or the payment response is working and how you can verify it. And now we can move to the next part.